On a Tuesday morning in March 1964, Marlon Brando was sitting in the waiting room at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York when he noticed an elderly janitor mopping the floor and crying. The man was 68 years old, wearing a name tag that said James. Brando walked over. "Are you okay?" James Washington looked up, recognized Brando, tried to compose himself. "Just having a day, sir." Brando sat down. "What's wrong?" For the next 10 minutes, Washington explained. His grandson had just been accepted to college, first in their family. But Washington could only contribute $800. Tuition was $1,200. He'd worked as a janitor for 40 years and couldn't make up the difference. Brando pulled out his checkbook, wrote a check for $400, and handed it to Washington. What he said next changed 3 generations. James Washington had been working as a janitor at Mount Sinai Hospital since 1924. He was born in Georgia in 1896, moved to New York during the Great Migration in 1920, found work wherever he could, cleaning buildings, washing dishes, manual labor. In 1924, Mount Sinai hired him as a janitor. Steady work, decent pay. He'd been there 40 years. Washington had a daughter, Ruth, born in 1928. He'd raised her alone after his wife died in 1935. Ruth had gone to nursing school, become a registered nurse, married a man named Charles Mitchell in 1945. They had a son, David, in 1946. David Mitchell was 18 years old in March 1964. Smart kid, good student, graduated high school in January, applied to college, got accepted to City College of New York. Tuition was $1,200 a year. Ruth and Charles could contribute $200. James had saved $800 over the years, keeping it in a coffee can in his apartment for emergencies. But that left $200 short. David was planning to work nights to make up the difference, maybe delay starting college until he could save more. James hated that. Hated that money was the thing keeping his grandson from getting an education. That Tuesday morning, James had come to work early, 6 o'clock shift. He'd been mopping floors for 2 hours, thinking about David, trying to figure out how to come up with $200 more. The weight of it, 40 years of work, and he still couldn't fully help his grandson, broke something in him. He started crying while he mopped, couldn't stop, just kept working and crying. That's when Brando walked over. James tried to pull himself together. "I'm sorry, sir, I shouldn't be, Don't apologize," Brando said. "Tell me what's wrong." James looked at this famous actor sitting in a hospital waiting room asking about his problems. It felt surreal, but there was something about the way Brando asked, not curious, not pitying, just direct, that made James tell him. "My grandson got into college. First person in our family, ever. He's a good kid, smart, works hard. But we're $200 short on tuition. I've got $800 saved. His parents can give $200. That leaves $200 we don't have." "What college?" "City College. He wants to be a doctor." Brando nodded. "What's your grandson's name?" "David." "David Mitchell." Brando pulled out his checkbook. James watched him write. Brando tore out the check and handed it to him. James looked at it. $400, made out to James Washington. James stared at the check. "Sir, I can't accept this." "Why not?" "It's too much. I only need $200. Now you can help with more than just tuition, books, supplies, whatever David needs." James's eyes filled with tears again. "Mr. Brando, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just listen." Brando leaned forward. "This isn't charity. It's an investment. When David graduates and becomes a doctor, tell him to help someone else's grandson. That's the payment. Pass it forward." James held the check carefully, like it might disappear. "I'll tell him. I promise." "Good." Brando stood up. "Your grandson's lucky to have you." James stood too. "Mr. Brando, why would you do this for us? You don't know us." Brando looked at him. "You've worked at this hospital for 40 years. You show up. You do your job. You're trying to help your grandson. That's worth investing in." Then Brando walked back to the waiting area and sat down. James stood there holding the check, trying to process what had just happened. 20 minutes later, Brando's friend came out of surgery. Successful procedure. Brando talked to the doctor, then left the hospital. He never saw James Washington again. James went home that afternoon and told his daughter Ruth what had happened. She didn't believe him at first. "Marlon Brando gave you $400? "He did. Wrote me a check right there in the waiting room." Ruth looked at the check. It was real. "Dad, this is incredible." "He said it's an investment. Said when David graduates, he should help someone else's grandson. That's the payment." Ruth hugged her father. "We'll make sure David knows." David Mitchell started at City College in September 1964. The extra $400 from Brando covered his books for 4 years, lab fees, supplies. Meant David didn't have to work as many hours, could focus on studying. David graduated in 1968 with a bachelor's degree in biology, got accepted to medical school. His grandfather was 72 by then, still working at Mount Sinai, still proud. In 1972, David Mitchell earned his medical degree, became Dr. David Mitchell, started his residency in pediatrics. His grandfather, James, now 76, retired from Mount Sinai after 48 years of mopping floors. James lived another 36 years. Quiet retirement in his apartment in Harlem, saw his grandson become a successful pediatrician, saw his great-grandchildren born, never told anyone outside the family about Marlon Brando's $400, kept it private out of pride, out of respect for Brando's discretion. In 2008, James Washington died at age 112. He lived long enough to see David become head of pediatrics at a hospital in the Bronx, long enough to see the ripple effects of $400 in 1964. The day before James died, David visited him in the hospital. James was weak but lucid. He asked David to sit down. "I need to tell you something I've never told anyone," James said. "What, Grandpa?" "That $400 I gave you for college in 1964, it wasn't all mine." David looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Marlon Brando gave it to me. I was mopping floors at Mount Sinai, crying because I couldn't come up with the full tuition. He saw me, asked what was wrong. I told him. He wrote me a check for $400. David sat back in his chair. "Marlon Brando?" "He said it wasn't charity. Said it was an investment. Said when you graduated, you should help someone else's grandson. That was the payment." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" James smiled weakly. "Pride, I guess. Wanted you to think I'd done it all myself. But that's foolish. Brando saw me. Really saw me. Not just a janitor. Saw a grandfather trying to help his grandson. That mattered more than the money." "Did you ever thank him?" "I tried. Wrote him a letter in 1968 when you graduated. Never heard back, but I think he knew." David held his grandfather's hand. "I'll make sure the investment pays off. I promise." James died the next morning. The funeral was held a week later at Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem. Family and friends filled the pews. David gave the eulogy. He talked about his grandfather's life, 48 years as a janitor, raising a daughter alone, working every day to provide. Then, David told a story nobody except his mother had heard. "In March 1964, my grandfather was mopping floors at Mount Sinai Hospital," David said. "He was crying because I'd been accepted to college, but we were short on tuition. Marlon Brando saw him, asked what was wrong. My grandfather told him, and Brando wrote him a check for $400. The congregation was silent. David continued. "Brando told my grandfather it wasn't charity. It was an investment. When I graduated, I was supposed to help someone else's grandson. That was the payment. Pass it forward." David paused, looking at the casket. "Grandpa kept that story private for 44 years, out of pride, out of respect. But I'm telling it now because people need to know what that $400 became. I graduated college in 1968, medical school in 1972, became a pediatrician. For the last 37 years, I've been helping kids get healthy. But I've also been paying forward that $400, put my niece through nursing school, helped my neighbor's son go to community college, paid for a patient's daughter to go to trade school, 7 kids total over the years, college, trade schools, nursing programs, anywhere they needed help." David's voice was thick now. "That $400 in 1964 changed 3 generations. My grandfather's investment in me, Marlon Brando's investment in my grandfather, and my investment in 7 other kids. That's what happens when someone sees you, really sees you. Not what you do for a living, who you are, what you're trying to accomplish." The story spread after the funeral. David's cousin posted about it on Facebook. A journalist from the New York Times saw it and contacted David, verified the story, published an article in April 2009. The $400 that changed 3 generations, Marlon Brando's quiet investment. The article reconstructed the story from David's testimony, his mother Ruth's confirmation, and hospital records showing James Washington had worked at Mount Sinai from 1924 to 1972. The article calculated that $400 in 1964 was equivalent to about $3,400 in 2009. But the real value wasn't the money, it was what David had done with it. 7 kids through college and trade school, 7 families changed, and those 7 kids had probably helped others too. The ripple effect of one check written in a hospital waiting room in 1964. The article went viral. People shared it on social media, commented on what it meant. Some focused on Brando's generosity, Others focused on James Washington's pride and discretion. Most focused on David Mitchell's 45 years of paying it forward. Robert De Niro, asked about the story in a 2009 interview, said, "That's Marlon, $400, and one sentence, pass it forward." He understood that money only matters if it moves. If it helps one person who helps another person, that's the investment. What made the story remarkable wasn't the amount. $400 was significant in 1964, but Brando had given larger sums to other people. What made it remarkable was the instruction. When your grandson graduates, tell him to help someone else's grandson. That's the payment. Brando didn't just give money, he gave a framework, a system for making the gift matter beyond the immediate transaction. He created a chain of generosity that lasted 45 years and touched at least 8 families directly, probably more that David didn't count. James Washington kept the story private for 44 years because he understood something important. Some gifts are too sacred to publicize. Brando had seen him in a moment of vulnerability and responded with dignity. Publishing that story while Brando was alive would have cheapened it, made it transactional instead of human. So James kept it quiet, told only his family, let the gift do its work without announcement, and David honored that by paying it forward quietly too. No press releases, no foundation, just helping kids when they needed help. Only after James died did David tell the story publicly. Not to glorify Brando, not to make himself look good, but to honor his grandfather's 48 years of work and the moment when someone finally saw him as more than a janitor. Brando saw me, really saw me. That mattered more than the money. That sentence, James's deathbed reflection, captures what made the moment transformative. Brando didn't just see a problem to solve, he saw a man worthy of investment, a grandfather working to help his grandson, a 40-year career of showing up and doing the work. And he responded not with pity, but with partnership. Now you can help. Not, let me help you, but now you can help. Recognizing that James wanted to be the one helping his grandson. The $400 wasn't replacing James's $800. It was supplementing it, making James's contribution more complete. That dignity, that recognition of James as an active participant rather than a passive recipient, is what James remembered 44 years later. The money mattered, but the respect mattered more. David Mitchell is 78 years old now, retired from medicine in 2015 after 43 years as a pediatrician. He still helps kids pay for school when he can. Still tells people about his grandfather and Marlon Brando and $400 that became 45 years of paying forward. In a 2019 interview, David was asked if he'd ever thanked Brando. "My grandfather wrote him a letter in 1968 when I graduated," David said. "Never heard back. But I don't think Brando needed thanks. He just wanted the investment to pay off. And it did. 7 kids through school. 43 years of helping families as a doctor. 3 generations changed. That's the thank you." The story of Marlon Brando and James Washington is about more than generosity. It's about seeing people, not what they do, who they are, what they're trying to accomplish. Brando saw a 68-year-old janitor crying in a hospital and didn't see a problem. He saw a grandfather trying to invest in his grandson's future, so he partnered with him, added to his investment, then gave him a framework for making that investment matter for generations. $400. One instruction, pass it forward. 45 years of ripple effects. That's not charity. That's what Brando said it was. An investment in people, in dignity, in the possibility that one moment of seeing someone can change 3 generations. James Washington mopped floors for 48 years, never became famous, never wealthy, just showed up and worked. And one Tuesday morning in March 1964, someone finally saw him, really saw him, and invested in what he was trying to build. That $400 is still paying dividends. Every kid David Mitchell helped, every patient he treated, every family he served, all of it traces back to a moment in a hospital waiting room when Marlon Brando chose to see a crying janitor as someone worth investing in. That's the real story, not the money, the seeing, the recognition, the respect, and 44 years of keeping it private because some gifts are too sacred to announce.